Hello everyone, this is Bryant with Amusement Source Media, and it is time for us to talk about the Cedar Fair Six Flags merger. Now, we've been pretty quiet on our channel about this, mainly because I kind of wanted this to play out and actually become a real life thing before we really dove into kind of our thoughts and our viewpoints on this. Just a quick recap of the merger. Essentially, Cedar Fair and Six Flags have merged. However, they did keep the Six Flags name. So now Six Flags water parks, dry parks, Cedar Fair water parks and dry parks are now under one umbrella. Now, the things I'm going to talk about are really just my viewpoints and my opinions. I am by no means an expert on how all of this crazy stuff works, but this is how I'm looking at it. So first part of this video, viewpoints of the merger. So I've been to several Cedar Fair parks. I've been to Cedar Point, Kings Island, Knott's Berry Farm, Carowinds, Schlitterbahn. So I've got a pretty good grasp on kind of how those parks function. Of course, this channel diligently covers Six Flags Over Texas and Six Flags Fiesta Texas. So we have a very intimate knowledge of what goes on at those parks and the changes that happen, week to week, month to month. But we've also been to, Great Adventure, Six Flags Over Georgia, Frontier City, Six Flags Magic Mountain, all kinds of Six Flags parks, Six Flags America, you name it. So my viewpoint is essentially Cedar Fair and Six Flags called it a merger of equals, but in reality, Cedar Fair ultimately kind of took over everything and then kept the Six Flags name. So Six Flags shareholders were able to vote on the merger and Cedar Fair shareholders weren't. This sounds fishy, but that's actually legally how things work, with Cedar Fair having 51% of the merger and then your Six Flags side being 49%. The Cedar Fair people actually do not have legally they don't have to vote. And that was probably a little bit by design, because if you look through news articles and things like that, you'll see that there were some pretty loud people on the Cedar Fair side that did not want this merger to happen. Another thing to me that kind of solidifies how things are going to operate is that corporate for this new merged Six Flags Entertainment Company is in Charlotte, and the Arlington headquarters for Six Flags is no more. Nearly every person, like I said, on the leadership team is from the Cedar Fair side of things, with the exception of Gary Mick, the Chief Integration Officer. He was previously with Six Flags. And in my opinion, even though Salim Basol, the CEO of Six Flags, is executive chairman of the board of this new merged company, I don't really feel like he's going to stick around for a super long time, but time will tell on that. I think through a little bit of forward planning, both chains realized that their business models might not necessarily bode well long term. And I think we really saw that on the Six Flags side with how things were going for them. So this next section I'm going to talk about are the positives that can happen from the merger. And these, like I said, are just my opinions. But here are some things that, if this merger plays out the way that I think all of the theme park fans want to, are some things we can look forward to. So I'm hoping that we see a better core of actual theme park professionals come back into our Six Flags parks to bring that side of the product back up to a respectable level. There's lots of crazy things going on the Six Flags side. A lot of very knowledgeable, qualified people have been laid off or let go, and they weren't necessarily filled with people who I would consider being qualified for those positions. It's nothing against those people. That is just how that company has flowed over the last few years. Now, the one thing about Six Flags is their technology, in my opinion, is a lot better than the Cedar Fair parks. So it would be great for the Six Flags mobile app, the mobile food ordering, the brand new photo system, all of that kind of stuff to be integrated into the Cedar Fair parks. So the level of routine maintenance and upkeep at Cedar Fair parks is well above and beyond what you would see at your average Six Flags park. And I know Cedar Fair parks are not perfect, nothing is perfect, but You are not going to walk into a Cedar Fair park and see buildings rotting with the trim falling off and things like that. So what we're hoping for is that the routine maintenance and upkeep at the Six Flags parks meets that of the Cedar Fair parks, and that we don't see a decrease in that. So I think from the outside looking in my opinion, Six Flags has done a lot more capital investment in their smaller parks than Cedar Fair has. Dorney Park finally got a brand new ride, which is a Cedar Fair park this year, a brand new roller coaster. But they hadn't really seen anything for a long time. I know they invest in their water park, but I'm really talking about the dry park, and that's just an example. However, I don't want to see a fireball going into every park, so I hope that, one, we can see better capital investments in these smaller parks, but two, make them more meaningful, if that makes sense. The food quality and food service at Cedar Fair overall in comparison to Six Flags is night and day. It is much better. We have actually had great food service at every Cedar Fair park we've gone to. The only exception to this rule is that the food quality at Carowinds was not that great. So I would love to see, at the very least, the food operations that Cedar Fair has put together, see that carry over to the Six Flags parks. And some Six Flags parks, the food's kind of all over the place. So it would be great to see a more consistent quality of food across the board. So at the time of the recording of this video, Cedar Fair does not have any service fees, surcharges, anything on their dining and their shopping. Can we just do that for Six Flags? This whole service fee thing on top of the really expensive food it's old. The other thing that I would like to see is a more simplified season pass system that goes across the Cedar Fair parks and of course the Six Flags parks. So if you go to some of the Cedar Fair park websites, you go to Cedar Point, or you go to the Worlds of Fun website, they have completely different pass levels, different ways to visit the other parks, things like that. Six Flags, they've got their 3 pass levels right now, with the exception of the legacy memberships, and those carry all the way through their parks. They're streamlined. That is something that we could really benefit from seeing at the Cedar Fair parks. One big thing for me is I would love to see a well-rounded and thought-out guest experience from Cedar Fair over to the Six Flags parks. Six Flags Over Texas, for example, would benefit from an entertainment and events overhaul, along with a better focus on their themed areas. If you've looked at any Cedar Fair parks recently, Knott's Berry Farm with their Spanish area, you've got Carowinds with their airplane, aeronautical themed area. They're being reimagined and they look great. So seeing that in some of our Six Flags parks would be a great thing. And Fiesta Texas, on the other hand, I think would really benefit from being better supported on their events, such as Mardi Gras Festival, with more resources to elevate their production quality back to what it once was. I think Six Flags Fiesta Texas does a phenomenal job with the resources they have from an entertainment standpoint, but raising them back up to kind of more of what they were originally known for while having all of the rides would be a really awesome thing to see. I would love to see more individuality from park to park, especially on the Six Flags side. Six Flags has a much more cookie cutter approach to their parks with the same kind of logos, branding, ride names, ride types. You go over to the Cedar Fair parks and you've got Knott's Berry Farm, for example, which is kind of packaged much differently than, say, Kings Island. Schlitterbahn is another great example. They took over Schlitterbahn, and they're letting Schlitterbahn really kind of be Schlitterbahn, if that makes sense, from a branding and a packaging standpoint. Better theming and materials quality to carry over from Cedar Fair to Six Flags is my next point. Perfect example is, you look at the queues of some of these newer Cedar Fair rides like Copperhead Strike at Carowinds or Iron Menace at Dorney Park. It's all pretty simple, but there is much more themed and immersive elements in these queues and in the ride stations. The use of concrete and pavers over blacktop is another thing, and I'm talking to you Six Flags parks, not putting chain link fence up in the queues, just seeing an overall enhancement to those very, what I would say are unconscious things, but would make a huge difference to the experience. Now, of course, this is something that's on everybody's mind, but just better operational hours for the Six Flags parks, being open later, especially at the Texas parks, to get people out of the sun, get them at the park at night, it's a much better experience. Now, I think it's really important to look at the flip side of this, kind of play devil's advocate here, and here are some potentially disastrous, not so great things that are also possible to happen from this merger that I really don't want to happen, but that I kind of, from a realistic standpoint, keep in the back of my head. The top one is the new company deciding to sell off and or close some of their properties. I think California's Great America is a prime example of that because that park was sold for the land value. Now, of course, that park is still operating, but over the next handful of years, you're really going to see that wind down, and eventually that park is scheduled to be no more. I think another big miss that is very possible to happen, and not necessarily impossible, but might take a while to execute, is seeing the effective integration of season pass levels that will get us into every single park. Now, I'm just going to say this because I know how people feel about this. I think season pass levels the prices are really going to increase with the merger, especially if they make it to where you can visit every single park in the chain. Now, on the flip side of that, that will not be a bad thing if they actually take their profits and invest them back into the parks. Another big worry of mine is that Cedar Fair's current flow of operations and investment doesn't carry over to the Six Flags parks. There's always this thing in the back of my mind that I'm worried that the two sets of parks do not integrate as one. Another big thing I have in the back of my head is that Cedar Fair leadership isn't able to rebuild Six Flags out of the reputation it has been given under its most recent management. There was a lot of things that were said. It really soured the Six Flags brand even further than it had already fallen. And the current leadership at Cedar Fair, they did an amazing job taking Cedar Fair from what it was several years ago and actually elevating it to a great regional theme park chain. Another worry of mine is that Six Flags parks do not get the personnel resources they need to be more successful. I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but there are multiple parks in the chain that are running with far less management and experienced people than they had in the past. Combining departments that don't need to be combined because of the checks and balances system that really needs to be in place. So I hope Cedar Fair addresses that, but it is something that could make a pretty big impact on the brand if it continues the way it is right now. And of course, this is something you have to keep in the back of your mind anytime competition gets eaten up. But will Cedar Fair management be more or less motivated to create the best quality product now that there's less competition? I don't know. We'll see. So I'm going to wrap this up with my final thoughts. I know that everybody kind of has a feeling one way or another, especially if your home parks are Cedar Fair based and if your home parks are Six Flags based. I think those two groups of people have very different ideas of this, and I would love to hear your, thoughts in the comments below. I'll kind of expand on that. I think people who frequent Six Flags parks are looking forward to positive changes, while Cedar Fair park goers may be a little bit worried heading into the future. I personally have hope and really want the Six Flags parks to come up to a level that the Cedar Fair parks have been operating in recent years, because it's a really nice regional theme park experience for the most part. Like I said, nothing's perfect, but for the money spent versus the value, Cedar Fair delivers pretty well. Another thing to kind of remember, and you may not know this, but when current management took over Cedar Fair during the Paramount purchase, the company was in a much worse spot. And I think there's really hope there that they will pivot through this massive change and continue that positive trend. Cedar Fair has a very consistent base of management and the way they do things. And I think one thing that Six Flags is really going to benefit from is that level of consistency moving forward. If y'all have any questions or, like I said, comments about the merger, please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are and how you think things are going to flow into the future. We thank you all for watching. Take care. We'll see you soon.